like to start by thanking the Irish Walled Towns Network for giving me this chance and to be able to share this project with you. I'll start by introducing the context of the project. As the first UK city of culture, Derry, Londonderry is really a spectacular site to be working in. It's the second largest city in Northern Ireland and the fourth largest on the island of Ireland. Most notably, it's also the last walled city to be built in Europe, and it stands as the most intact. The city itself is spread across both sides of the River Foyle, and it offers two main narratives of the urban condition. On the west side you have the historic city, and on the east you have the more expansive urban experiences of the newer city. This is a place where the city is rich in history and the ghosts of the past reside in the streets. It's a place of crossing, scholarship, port, industry and outpost at the edge of an empire, and experienced some of the biggest events in our history, and therefore it's really developed a character that you can see in the built environment of the city. I think it's important to understand the past of the city to be able to make any sort of intervention. So I'll go through a chronology. Derry is actually one of the oldest continually inhabited sites on the island. It's been a settlement for centuries, but the first really established thing was a monastery being founded on the site by St. Columba in the 6th century. This monastery grew in prominence, and that's where the name Derry comes from, Dwyer, meaning city of oak. The first urban settlement really only came in 1600 when an Elizabethan star fort under Queen Elizabeth came. But this only lasted not a very long while at all. It was virtually wiped out in 1608 by an Irish chieftain. After that fort was wiped out, work began in 1613 of the city we know today as Derry Londonderry, named for the London financiers. This was Ireland's first planned city, based on a diamond surrounded by a mile-long wall with 4 gates and a new cathedral dedicated to its founder. The city famously was the stage for the 1689 siege, which earned it the name of the Maiden City, as its walls were never breached. Following the siege, obviously most of the city within the walls and outside it were rebuilt. You can see the density there has grown a lot. The size and population really expanded from then on, and with the development of the port, Derry is really becoming accessible to the rest of Ulster and the south. The city continued to grow really beyond the walls, and the walls really became densified after the siege. And the Industrial Revolution really brought a boom to Derry, and it became one of the finest manufacturers of shirts and textiles in Europe. On the outskirts also you can see the suburbs are being very built up, distinctive patterns of houses are emerging. And also the establishment of a new wooden bridge meant what we know today as the Waterside was founded on the other side of the River Foyle. Obviously in recent history, August 1969 saw rioting in the Bogside, and the Battle of the Bogside was established the Troubles. This was 30 years of sectarian violence with Derry on the front lines. And it really divided the city in terms of an urban place as well as socially and politically. The nationalist city side and the unionist water side became divided. Even the walls were closed and barricaded. Derry still bears the scars of this troubled past, but conflict breeds creativity, and since then the community have learned to work together and the walls have reopened around a united city. It's a place with two names, but one hope for a single shared future. The city, therefore, is not only experienced through what we see today, but also through how we remember it and the memory of what's happened. Many people you talk to in the city can talk about a place that's not there, hasn't been there for a long time, but in their mind it's as clear as ever. So this shows clearly how the past is still very relevant in the future and how we experience the city. Derry's history is really continuing to be shaped in terms of politics and cultural attitudes and community integration. But it's that material legacy of the past that I'm focusing on and how that's represented and shown. There's currently several frameworks working together to make a more unified public resource. Derry actually curates the largest collection of archival material outside the Public Records Office in Northern Ireland, which is really no surprise. Current frameworks at the minute, well actually, I've spoken to the city archivist who was able to tell me there's enough archival material to fill 7 archive buildings over. So really there is a need for this resource. Current frameworks that exist are the BT Portrait of a City, which is using images from the public, essentially the public's own personal archives and family histories, to build up a sort of online platform for the entire city. And there's also Digital Historic Towns Atlas, which was actually made in partnership with Queen's and where we are today, the Royal Irish Academy. And this is an online web tool which provides topographic information on selected time periods. So you can really see from this there's both a need and a desire to create a unified public resource for all this information. So I'm proposing that a regional archive based right in the historic core of the city would provide an educational resource that's really missing in Derry at the minute. There's currently sort of 4 main museums in Derry: St Columba Museum, the Siege Museum, Maritime Museum that's being planned, and the Tower Museum. But at the minute, the fact that there are 4 museums is manifesting itself as a compartmentalisation of this history. It's a fragmentation. There's not one single place. So my proposal would integrate this history of Derry into one building, and it would be one container in the city to celebrate its past. The site I chose for the project sits in a very underused part of the city, which is shocking considering the amount of listed buildings that surrounds it. You have the First Presbyterian Church, the Diamond obviously, the Apprentice Boys Hall, St Augustine's Church, the former Bishop's Palace, and St Columba's Cathedral, with the site seen in red there. So this is a view from the junction of the site on Palace Street and Society Street. This is one of the few places in the city where the grid of the diamond is broken because of the presence of St Augustine's Church, which is on the right there. You can also see where St Columba's Church or Cathedral is sitting. The grid is also broken, so the presence of an ecclesiastical building is changing the grid of the city here, which makes it really interesting to work with. And the views from the site, this is from a neighbouring building beside the site. You can see right over to the Craigan, the Bogside, and the hills beyond it. It's really quite a spectacular place in the city. It's almost like a Greek acropolis, and frankly it's quite disgraceful that it's used as a car park and for the council to wash out their wheelie bins at the minute. Another change I would make to the infrastructure around the site would be to pedestrianise Palace Street, which is there. You can see in this picture here, it's a very small scale street with no parking on either side. And there's very little cars that use it, so it lends itself much more comfortably to pedestrian use. Early on, I came up with a series of design strategies that would be the main drivers for the scheme. So in keeping with the idea, the archive would be the container of the space, the container of the treasured history of the city. It would sit at the back, you can see here. And then around it would sit this lower mass with the more collective communal functions of the building. And then because it's a physical junction of 2 meeting places, there would be this gathering space that sort of forms itself naturally. Also, as I've said, focusing on the city grid here, you can see it's a meeting of this main grid here with the ecclesiastical one. So how that works in the morphology of the city is something I wanted to look at. And also down here, as you've just seen, what views I wanted to establish and how to take advantage of those. So I worked through a series of models, mainly in sketches, forms, internal arrangements, which became more and more engaged with the city and its context and the building typology as well, until I arrived at a final design that I feel is very appropriate for a place of shared heritage and education. So this is the final proposal. You can see here, this is the proposal sitting in its context. 3 main blocks. The back one obviously is the archive, and then these 2 lower masses with the public space here and an atrium inside. And you can see it's sort of mirrored by the graveyard space here St Augustine's, the Apprentice Boys, and obviously its direct frontage onto the city walls. So this is a closer view of the plans I drew up. On the junction here you have a public space with an enclosed wall with seating and sheltered by 2 existing trees. That would be a reading space or to meet your friends before entering the archive. On entering, you have this large atrium with a cafe and exhibition space that spills out into it, while the archive sits as this massing at the back, remaining the focal point. The archive also has a basement level, so from this point here on the ground floor, that's a void where you can look down and actually see the process of cataloguing and people working on these documents. So continuing to the upper floors, on the first floor you have bridge links which link the archive block to a lecture theatre that looks out onto Society Street and also at the same level of the trees. And on the other side you have photography, studio and educational workspace. This is where those 2 blocks end, and it continues on up in the form of a library, an open access library for 3 more floors. So it's really quite a tall structure for the archive itself. So this perspective shows what I'm suggesting is the new pedestrian streetscape of Palace Street. This is St Augustine's Church, and this would be my proposal. You can see there's no openings in my proposal because I wanted to establish an intimacy there, allowing St Augustine's to be celebrated as a historic gem in its own right, while still allowing my build to be a celebrated new addition to the city. This would be on the opposite side then, on Society Street. I've worked to try and integrate it with the existing streetscape, and you can see this would be the new public space with the graveyard behind it. It's 2 green spaces in the city. So this is a section through the building where you can really appreciate the experiences you would have inside. So at this point here, you can look straight down and see the archive in motion, and also in here. You can also see the public space again, and the openness of the library on the top with this big window that overlooks the city and the city being able to look back into it. Central to the idea of an archive is also the potential for education, so the inclusion of an educational workspace and a lecture theatre is something I think is very important for establishing a community development framework, something that can be taken by the community, a bottom-up initiative run by them and for them. And this perspective here shows your view from the very top level of the special collections room, where the individual has the chance to be in their own study booth with the history of the city, looking out at the city they're reading about. This shows the library again on the top floor, this triple height space with the study booth that would be up here. And it's just in keeping with that idea of a shared history, it's for everyone. Another thing I wanted to work with, currently the nightscape of the city and the nighttime economy is something that several initiatives are working towards improving. So currently there's the Illuminating the City project, which is at night illuminating the city walls, the Craigavon Bridge and 6 other sites in the Built Heritage programme. I would propose that my building is self-illuminating, it's open at night, and it's really helping the nightscape of the city become a more safe and vibrant place, which is something that's important for it being a sustainable social place. I believe that my proposal successfully mediates culturally, socially and temporally in a place that's really quite a challenging setting and context to be working in, and it's surrounded by so many of Derry's historic buildings. You can see the Apprentice Boys here, a shirt factory there, the St Augustine's Church, and just further beyond this photo, the city walls themselves. I believe this is a really exciting model for the city, and it could be applied to a lot of other similar places with similar challenges. And I'd like to end with a few words from Seamus Heaney from the Curate Troy. History says, don't hope on this side of the grave, but then once in a lifetime, the longed for tidal wave of justice can rise up and hope and history rhyme. Thank you very much.